Testing. Welcome back. Okay, we're going to do the Get a Clue workshop now. So if you're here to see the Academy Award nominated speaker Mark Smolowitz, he's upstairs in the library, which you proceed to up the elevator to second floor. Okay. But this is totally going to be better. Yes. Sorry, I should have started that way. Okay, so the Get a Clue workshop is being led by Crystal Houghton. Is that the right way to pronounce your last name? I should know by now. Sorry. She is a native of the Philadelphia area and a graduate from the Scholars Program at Penn State. She moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in TV writing and is currently doing just that. Crystal is a writer-producer for CSI Miami. Huzzah, we applaud you. She actually began her 6th season, 6, count 'em, writing for the show. Crystal was introduced to Donate Life after writing an episode about organ transplants. This is her 2nd year participating in the Donate Life Film Festival, for which I personally can say I am extremely grateful. Sure. The festival is an amazingly, she wrote this, and yes, Crystal, the festival, she says, is an amazingly inspirational event, supporting a remarkable cause, not to mention a great place to get story ideas. Crystal, please take it away.
Sure, well, everyone here is going to introduce themselves, I think, and this is my first time meeting most of them. I know you from last year.
My name is Prasad Garmela. I have a medical degree from Ramchandra Medical College in India. I have 10 years of background and experience in organ and tissue donation. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for OneLegacy.
I'm Bob Kormos. I'm a cardiac transplant surgeon. I ran the heart and lung transplant program at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm now in charge of the artificial heart program, and got involved in this last year. Enjoyed it very much. Glad to be back a second time.
Alan Langness, University of Nebraska. I'm the chief of the transplant program there. I personally do mostly liver, small bowel transplants, and that sort of stuff. It's my first time here. I'm very excited. It's great fun.
I'm Dr. Lakshmanan Satyavagishwaran. I'm the chief medical examiner and coroner for the County of Los Angeles. I've been with the county for 33 years. I've been the chief medical examiner coroner for 18. I hold clinical professor faculty appointments at both the USC and UCLA schools of medicine. I've handled many high-profile cases, many disasters for Los Angeles County, and I work very closely with 52 law enforcement agencies, and we serve the whole county. Our department of 218 staff, we cover 88 cities, and we handle a caseload of about 20,000 cases a year, in which about 1,000 plus are homicides and criminal investigations. And my colleague here, we work closely on some cases together.
Yes, we have. My name is Dennis Kilcoy, and I'm with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I'm a homicide detective in a special unit out of our headquarters building. And I've been with the police department for a little over 33 years now, and worked homicide for the past 27 years. And I've been involved in most of the high-profile cases that we've had in Los Angeles in the past 20 years anyways. And Dr. Lakshmanan and I have got to know one another quite well because of the cases we've been involved in over the years, from the Simpson case to Ennis Cosby, multiple officers that are murdered. My office handles the murder of police officers, whether they're from our department or not, that happened in the city of Los Angeles. And just a lot of oddball things that come up that are high profile, VIP, or media attentive. My office is involved in.
I'm here only because we work very closely with OneLegacy, and many of the donors are unfortunately tragic victims who come to the coroner's office, and that's why we work closely with OneLegacy, and we try our best to allow for organ donation as long as it doesn't interfere with our cause of death determination, injury interpretation, or evidence collection.
And I guess I started getting involved because I wrote an episode about organ surgeries that was not accurate and not a good portrayal, and they let me know. And so,
It wasn't me, it was Tanaya.
whoops. But now, I'm interested in finding out how we can do it more accurately. And, we've heard a lot about the medical shows, but on crime shows, it's generally kind of negative stuff that's happening where somebody's doing something bad to someone else. But I think just as using organ donation bits of science and stuff as clues, we could get our characters to even just say positive things about, like you're saying, maybe you could tell us more about how it works if you get a body is there a conflict of interest if they want to donate organs versus autopsy?
There are several issues which come up during organ donation. And one of the concerns we have is whether, as I told earlier, whether it will interfere with our cause of death determination or injury interpretation. So we have come up with protocols, and we get two types of cases. We allow for tissue donation, which is different from organ donation. And organ donations are usually either brain dead patients, and now we have a new type of donor, which is a donation after cardiac death. So we work closely with OneLegacy on both issues. And what happens is in certain cases, like child abuse cases, there's a lot of concern from the prosecutors. So what we try and do is in certain sensitive cases where we have some concerns on loss of critical findings, we send a doctor to the hospital. And that's a program we have worked out with OneLegacy. And I think on the whole, I would say that our approval rate for organ donation is in the high 90% range. And Dr. Prasad can correct me if I'm wrong. And the other thing I failed to mention, that I'm also the president of the National Association of Medical Examiners for the whole United States. And the position of the National Association of Medical Examiners is to promote organ donation. And one of the concerns many medical examiners have is, will it interfere with our testifying in court? And the same concern prosecutors have. And as far as law enforcement goes, their concern is there any evidence, can any critical evidence be lost? And so basically, we try and bridge that concern for law enforcement, the prosecutors, so that organ donation can take place. I'm not saying 100%. I never said 100% in my office. There are a few cases where there's some concern, but we try our best. We try our best because I had my own personal friend who died, and he died without getting a kidney, and he died. And then we had another personal friend. My wife is here, Dr. Vijay Lakshmanan, and she's a pediatrician. Her close friend needed a heart transplant. And when he had the heart transplant, first time he went, they couldn't put the heart which was available because there were some problems. So he was wheeled into the operating room and then wheeled out. The second time around, he got the heart transplant. He saw his daughter get married. And it was a very, 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 very touching, good feeling when we went to the marriage, went to his daughter's marriage. And last but not the least, we do in-service for my department. We had a lot of OneLegacy staff and recipients who come to our office. And I'll never forget one gentleman who was a recipient. He was an Afro-American gentleman. He said, I'm an Afro-American with a white man's heart in me. And that made a tremendous impact because I think we are all the same inside. And one of the problems I find in society is we assume, we don't ask. And we should ask people. And then you find that everything opens up. That's all I have to say. I think I talked more than I should.
Thank you. No, that's interesting. We'll definitely see. It sounds like we can do an episode where we can donate and then do an autopsy, and our people can, experience who's getting the new organs. What about for our doctors here and for the coroner? If we had a dead body on the table that had no identity, what are the signs in the body that would tell us, this person has had or given a transplant that can maybe help us get their identity and solve the case?
Well, obviously, like too technical, I think that if you're doing a proper autopsy and you open somebody up, it's pretty self-evident that the person.
What about even before you open them up? Is it evident by a certain scar? Or?
Well, the scar, scars are not particularly, easy ways to determine what somebody's had done on the inside. I think Bob, who does heart surgery, heart transplantation, that scar is identical to somebody who's had coronary bypass.
So you wouldn't know.
And the scar that I would put on somebody's belly would be similar to somebody who had a big gallbladder operation or something like that, or something along those lines. So that really wouldn't be a great clue.
Gotcha.
You might know from, on a heart transplant patient, you might know because they very often have a lot of scars on the side of their neck where they've had biopsies, catheterizations for biopsies of the heart along the way for rejection. So you might pick up that this guy's had, or woman has had a lot more things done to them than normal, because you're going to see a lot of scars on the side of the neck.
Right.
But you can't really tell otherwise from just looking at the person.
So you have to do your job down there, and
Right.
Yeah.
then
But
we find out.
But I will tell you, the really compelling story is the issue of what the medical examiners, the coroners, and the district attorneys will do or not do. Because Los Angeles sounds like they have a very proactive and very collegial relationship between all the various groups that participate. But that's unusual.
Yeah, I would agree with you that we have had, I mean, you almost need a clearinghouse nationally to help some of the people in certain regions, the examiners, because it's not uncommon for us to hear that things are either delayed or may not go because the examiner does not want to release the body. And so that occasionally has
It's more than occasional.
come up.
It's
And
more
what do
than
you do
occasional.
in that case? Do you try to lobby, or there's nothing you can do?
Oh,
I mean, we do, and the OPOs, I think, work very strongly to try and sometimes they're successful, but I don't know what the rates are like.
yeah, they vary, and I would say that, for us, an experience would be in some county in, western Iowa or something, where they have a guy who's the medical examiner who really doesn't want to get out of bed, and who doesn't, and the district attorney or the county attorney is going to defer to whatever that person says they want to do, and the whole process just, defaults to not have donation, because to do donation is a big effort, and the county attorney or the district attorney has to accept a lot of risk in terms of, because there is some potential loss of evidence and some, chain of stuff that they have to do in it. And so you really have to get people on the same page, and it's a challenge, I can tell you. In our part of the world, it can be an enormous challenge. And,
As I mentioned earlier, we at the Department of Coroner Medical Examiner in Los Angeles, we have periodic meetings, which is called the Criminal Justice Interagency Meeting, which I coordinate, where I have the representative for the LAPD, Sheriff, Police Chiefs Association, District Attorney, where we discuss matters of mutual concern. And one of the issues which came up a few years ago was this law which was passed where to say no in California, the medical examiner coroner has to go to the hospital to say no, especially in organ donation cases. And so when that came up, that's the time we discussed that, and Mr. Tom Mones was there. I don't know, is he in the audience? I saw him earlier. He was there, and he and Mr. Maldonado was there, I think, in that meeting. We had a big meeting in my office with the DA, the police, and as I told you, their main concern is when a suspect has a contact with a victim in a potential homicide case, there's always transfer of evidence, and they were concerned whether any evidence could be lost. And that's when we came to an arrangement. I wish I could send a doctor to every case in the hospital. I don't have that many forensic pathologists. There's a big shortage of forensic pathologists. We only have 25 forensic pathologists. We have about 5 to 7% of the forensic pathologists in the country is working in my office. So we send them for special cases like child abuse where there's really a concern. But 9 out of 10 times, the screening is excellent with OneLegacy. They get everything we need. Even this last weekend, I take calls sometimes on Friday, and we had a gentleman where we allowed procurement. They get a CT scan if I need to get a CT scan done, and it runs pretty rapidly. And we do our best because I think there's somebody waiting for an organ, and I think if we don't need it for a cause of death or successful prosecution or a criminal case, we should support it. And that's my viewpoint, and we try our best, and we have an insight. And when you get new staff in an office, there's a learning curve, which takes time, and I think that also is accomplished.
What about for our detective? Do you find resistance among the police departments?
Well, it's, forensics and investigative techniques and the court system and everything, forensics is coming like a tidal wave. And the law enforcement and the courts and the attorneys are trying to absorb all of this and try to deal with it. Everybody thinks DNA is the big thing today, which it is. 10 years ago, we couldn't spell it. And that, but it, if you think back of, for example, when fingerprints were taken for the first time, probably in the 20s or 30s. And now it's just a commonplace thing. You don't think twice. Everybody, just about 90% of the population has got a fingerprint card on file somewhere for something, employment, whatever. And I don't know if that'll happen with DNA, but the answer with the writers, you know, DNA is not always the answer. Sometimes you have to get out and actually talk to people still, and the answer is not going to pop up on your screen. So with the organ donation programs, homicide detectives rarely come in contact with someone who is a victim who is being sustained on life support at a hospital. Most of our people are dead at a scene, have been there for hours, if not days, weeks, or months, and obviously there's no chance of any procurement of anything at that point, I would assume. I don't know what the time frame is for that, but oftentimes when we go to a hospital and you've got somebody that's basically brain dead, and the family's gathering, and the medical staff is gathering, and what we're trying to, my introduction to OneLegacy was a few months ago, was for a homicide conference that involved homicide detectives from all over the western United States. And I invited OneLegacy to come and join us because they have a concern that law enforcement is an obstruction to the process at the hospital. And that I can see that that does happen, and it's because of ignorance on our part as to what exactly, most of our detectives are unaware that the coroner will send a doctor to the hospital to perform whatever they need to perform at the time. And if you got somebody that's shot in the head, well, you got a lot of good parts down below that are still vital, I would assume. And
Is that true?
and we don't need a detective standing there saying, no, you can't touch it, don't come across the yellow tape, I'm going to light another flare, whatever they do. And because they're scared. I mean, you haven't lived until you've sat in a courtroom and had your hiney reamed for about 2 or 3 days because of something you did at a crime scene or didn't do. And anyway, so it's a learning curve, like the doctors mentioned, and we need to educate not only the public but our law enforcement as well to kind of be open-minded as to what's taking place.
Definitely.
And then as one in the smaller areas, your sheriff and coroner are often the same position. It's an elected position, and it's and I can see where sheriff coroner's office may be an obstruction to some of the things you're trying to accomplish.
We can try to show our people learning about the issues maybe and allowing the donation before the autopsy.
But in Los Angeles County, it's independent office. We are the chief medical examiner coroner's office, an independent office, and that's what the people wanted in 1956 by a charter amendment. The coroner has to be a doctor and a forensic pathologist. And the first person was Dr. Curfey, and then we had Dr. Noguchi, Kornblum. I got appointed in '92. So this may be good for the county because we are not under any health department or police department. I report directly to the Board of Supervisors.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned fingerprints, and last year we heard a little bit that it's actually possible now to transplant hands, and that could be an interesting case for the CSIs where someone's prints aren't exactly who we think. How did those transplants work? Who would get them? What kind of patients?
Well, you know, that's interesting. We usually these are, very often they're victims of major trauma and you know, blast injury, fires, or they could be from the military, for example, is the roadside bombs and things like that very often damage these people beyond repair. And so hand transplants are becoming more common. In Pittsburgh, we now have a program for both hand and face, which is, you know, the way we identify most people. So, you know, there could be lots of interesting themes there. But, you know, I hate to put the transplant recipient as either the victim or the perpetrator. I mean, but you could get a very interesting story because the prints of the donor are now on the recipient. And as far as I know, there's no requirement yet to document the source of those fingerprints. So if evidence, for example, was contaminated by a recipient of a hand transplant, you're going to follow, right, the prints of the donor who has died, and you're going to hit a roadblock. So now you're going to have to figure out that that actually came from a donor, which I don't even know if they release that information.
Yeah, do you have any access to know if someone's in the system and dies and donates their hands, would it come up on their record? Or would you have to call the hospital and investigate?
I don't have a clue.
So we can make it up.
Can I have a number, doctor? How many people got a hand transplant?
Very few. I would say we're talking probably, really 2 or 3 in the U.S. now, or maybe
a handful.
Just a handful. Yeah. But it would provide for an interesting spin, I think, if you did it right.
Definitely. What other kind of things are being transplanted that we might know about? We hear about liver and kidney a lot.
Pancreas, small intestine, hearts, lungs, faces. There was a request last
Cornea?
night by somebody for an organ. Who was that woman who was asking for organ transplant? Was it the
I don't recall, but skin, and they're using, I think, blood vessels in some cases now.
blood vessels? Yeah, it was a sexual organ transplant that she was requesting.
Yeah.
Did she get it?
I
No,
don't
she
know.
was-
I'm not going to carry. I think that conversation,
Yep.
and it was a conversation that was taking
brought it
place
up.
over cocktails at the thing last night, and which that was her request to
Now-
Bob and I. Can you do this?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so-
Now, if you're willing to take the story out of the country,
All right, maybe. Miami is very international
yeah,
location.
if you're willing to go south, life and death gets very interesting. A few years back, and I'll try to keep this anonymous, but a few years back, a surgeon that I know was in Colombia. They asked him to come and give a lecture. He arrived that evening, and he gave his lecture, and then they said, well, since you're here, do you mind helping us with a heart transplant? He said, yeah, sure, no problem. And something came up with the donor family. He became aware of it and said, I'd rather not do this unless we have all that clarified. So, fine. The next night, he was at dinner, and he got another call saying, we have another donor for this recipient. Would you mind helping with the surgery? And he again said, sure, no problem. And then another issue came up. But on the third night, they got another donor. And at that point, he started to wonder a little bit about what was going on. This was in Colombia. And I said, well, who was the recipient? He said, well, it was the chief of police. I said, didn't you get a little suspicious about what was happening? Now, that's why I say, if you're, and the other thing about, you probably realize that patients in the United States go to other countries for transplants. They take advantage of the fact that things aren't as well managed in other countries in the world, and they're willing to go there.
Or transplant tourism.
Transplant tourism. And what we're dealing with right now in transplant societies is the fact that these organs aren't screened as well as they're screened here for especially communicable diseases. So now you have the potential of somebody receiving an organ in another country that comes back with a disease that wouldn't be seen in the U.S. and could be disseminated before you figure out that it's coming from a transplant recipient. Again, producing a rather interesting storyline and some interesting situations for the coroner, who's now got a pathology that he can't identify.
Definitely. Or if they're living, like on house. You can many medical writers here with the medical mystery.
Right. I mean, you can
So-
imagine something, right? With because the classic countries now obviously is China and things like that, where they do a lot of that, and so they have a lot of interesting diseases there that Bob suggests. And as a liver person, one of the things that you think about is, there's a thing called Clonorchis, which is a liver fluke. So so for example, a guy like me would go over there and get a liver transplant and come back here, and something would happen to me, and guys like you, find me on their table, they take me apart, and they suddenly look in this liver, and they go, what the heck's this guy doing here? He's had some surgery, and he's got liver flukes in there. Now, why is some guy from Detroit or Omaha got liver flukes in his liver? And then he just kind of becomes a very, very interesting scenario
Definitely.
it's a.
I just want to add that we don't blindly do an autopsy. We have a good investigation system. So usually this information is already known to us 9 out of 10 times. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but sometimes we do have a person who's found in the bus stop or somewhere where we don't have adequate medical history, and then this can happen, what you said.
Right.
But
Definitely.
9 out of 10
This
times.
is we're talking about television. We're not talking about.
And to satisfy
this is in
our
your office.
mission with Donate Life, I think the message might be, If only there were more donors in the U.S., we wouldn't have to go
There you
to
go.
China and
Right.
There you go.
get liver flukes.
Or something like that, or something silly like that.
That sounds a little scary. And what about growing body parts? Is that come a long way, or do we still have a long way to go? And are these being transplanted?
Yes.
What kind of things, and how does it work? How do you grow them?
Well, it's very interesting. There's a lot of things that are growing now. It's all at very early stages, and I know Bob's probably seen this thing that just came out of the University of Minnesota, where the woman there who sort of took all the cells out of a rat heart and repopulated it with stem cells and regrew a heart that didn't function all that well, but did pump a little bit of blood. And so those things are, there's a long ways to go, and there's years ahead of us. But
Gotcha.
but those things are a lot of really smart people are spending a lot of time working on it, and people are spending a lot of money on it. There's a woman here at USC, a woman named Tracy Grickscheit, who I know very well, and Tracy is now doing tissue engineering small intestine. She's taking your own cells out of you, finding stem cells, and then creating a scaffolding, and then putting these cells in there, and actually she's created these little organelle balls that are now small intestine, that if you cut them up and you look at them under the microscope, they look perfectly like small intestine. So now her challenge is to grow them a little bit longer so that we can take people who don't have enough intestine for whatever reason and put them in them. So these things are they're not ready for prime time. The whole idea of xenotransplantation and taking organs from animals, there's been a lot of issues with that. I know Bob's probably been involved in that, and I've been involved in that over the years, and it's just never quite gotten over the hump for a variety of reasons. But these things, as the technologies have evolved, our issues with infectious disease, our issues with developing all the different things we need to grow organs, I think we're making a lot of progress. So
That could definitely be an interesting clue. I assume you can get DNA from any tissue in the body, from the small intestines. We find a lady's small intestines, and then she looks fine, and it's because they're growing more.
well, right, right. I think it's those things sound a little. They are science fiction, but they're not. But people are doing them in laboratories in the United States and coming close.
We have, spoiler alert, all of our characters, fell down at the end of the season, and one of them's not going to make it. If we wanted to have him somehow have a storyline about being able to donate, what are the circumstances? Like, he'd have to be brain dead, or
Maybe.
Very willing.
well, let's say he's an organ donor.
Right,
on
very
his
very
form.
cooperative. He'll be able to hold.
Is it true that if you're an organ donor on your form, but your family doesn't want to do it, that they can block it?
That's a very good point, actually, and it depends on the state you live in. So like in Nebraska, we have something called first-person consent. So if I sign a card that says yes or no, it's yes or no. But in other states that don't have it, all that card is a guide to your family as to what your wishes are, because ultimately you're dead, and then your family has the decisions about your body. So your card will not necessarily, it'll tell your family what you'd like to do, but it doesn't tell them what they have to do.
Right, yeah.
Well, registered, for us in California, obviously, we have registered consent where the donor, through our DMV, most of our registered donors are through DMV. I think currently we're at 27, Hetty, what's our current 6.7 million registered donors in the state of California? It is an advanced directive. It's not really an option in the state of California for ours, where the family has a choice. We currently have about 17% of our organ donors are registered. So it's really an advanced directive from them, and we try to honor that wish. And for the most part, 100% of our registered donors are donors.
Is there anything a person or one of our characters could do beyond just having it on their license to make sure everybody knows?
A tattoo?
Do people do that?
A pink dot tattoo?
Do people do that?
No, I don't think we have a case of anybody here having a tattooed pink dot yet.
We will.
Yeah.
So if you saw that, then you were at the hospital,
Yeah, Bob.
Well, no, I was just going to say the only other way that this character would be able to donate is his family there could be a determination that his chances of recovery are next to nil. And, you could be, a deceased cardiac donor where everybody agrees that the likelihood of recovery is so slim that you don't have to wait for brain death. You can decide ahead of time, and then that person is taken off life support. In the operating room, an appropriate period of time is allotted to ensure that the heart isn't going to start again, and then you can take those organs. So we do see that more frequently in some cases as well.
Right.
What would really be awesome is if one of your investigators was a donor in a hand transplant, and potentially those fingerprints are used to gain access into your systems and
I like the way you think.
criminal activity.
Yeah, I guess the idea would be for the police department, once an officer dies, to take the prints out, but maybe there could be an oversight.
There is absolutely, there's no plan yet that, I've talked, neither FBI nor any of they don't know how to deal with this yet. There is absolutely no plan for what happens to the fingerprints that leave one person and go to another person.
And we will potentially cause that problem in LA because we are working with UCLA on hand transplant programs. So we will create some
Anytime that
ruckus
there's
for you.
I mean, in real life, anytime that there is a discrepancy, because oftentimes we find people, victims that their digits have been purposely removed, their face has been distorted, things have been done to the body, the victim, to hamper identification so that the crook gets further and further away. And sometimes it's because of, if you're out in the wilderness and stuff, sometimes it's because of animals. But any time that there's going to be a question of, who's who on the table there, it's going to come down to the DNA and a final check. But there was an interesting case here in Buena Park here, I guess last year, where it was widely covered in the media. This young lady met this maniac, and he killed her, put her in a suitcase or such thing, and cut her fingers off, distorted her face, all of these different things to hamper identification. And then ultimately he fled up to a motel in Canada and killed himself, I think, as they chased him for a few days.
That actress.
Yeah, but she was identified at the coroner's office because her breast implants have serial numbers on them. And I'd never heard of that before. And, I don't know why I would.
Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, oftentimes, I don't know if like implant, knee, hip, these type of things, if they have numbers or it could
everyone.
be backtracked, but that's a possibility.
Bob does that every day. He's always putting parts in people that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
They're all labeled with one thing, like valves and stuff like that.
Heart pumps, valves, all those things, their serial numbers all tracked.
We have identified people with pacemakers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
with
for
tracking
sure. Oh
down.
yeah, for sure.
And one unusual case was a young gentleman who had a shotgun wound injury to his leg, and the pellets did not penetrate deeply. They were only the subcutaneous tissue, so naturally the surgeon didn't take the pellets out. And when the kid died, the only way we identified him, he didn't have any dental, no fingerprints. Odontology is another way we identified teeth. So here we had an X-ray from the hospital which showed the same pellet pattern and the ankle, and we identified him. I just want to bring it up. There are different, we use every method we can before we go to DNA, because DNA is expensive, it takes time, and it
I
has to
fully
be.
acknowledge that on our show it takes a minute, but we know that's not the case in real life. For sure.
So there are many methods we use, and I just gave you some examples. And he already gave you the breast implant.
Definitely, yeah. Are there any cases that you've ever worked on that you're like, that should be on TV, or things that you think should be told, whether they're interesting clues or just compelling,
Actually,
stories?
we did have a show already. It's on True TV. We have produced about 50 episodes. The title of the show is called North Mission Road, and I think it's available on DVD, and I think you can get it in our store, corner store. I'm sorry I had to throw in an advertisement for my office, but anyway, it goes to the county, so no royalties here. So.
But oftentimes, we have investigations where we'll only have a piece of somebody. We never find the rest of them. And especially with the Pacific Ocean right here, there's been cases in the past where, some arms and legs come up on shore or whatever. I personally had a number of cases where one, I had a head and 2 feet, and I never found the rest of the guy. The landfills are filled with people. I mean, the best way to get rid of somebody is a dumpster. And
I know the case very well.
Because at the end of the day, especially in a city like Los Angeles, you know, that truck dumps, and then by the late afternoon, whatever they dumped in the morning is about 10 feet under the rest of the day, and by, imagine a month from then, it's never found. But that's quite a challenge. Or someone who is new to the country is an extreme challenge to identify these people, whether it's, I had a Korean girl that turned out to be a prostitute that was working in Okinawa, and the guy was running girls from out of San Diego. He was recruiting them at the women's jail here in LA County. He would get them out, and he would either use them here in Los Angeles or Okinawa, because the Japanese businessmen apparently frequent going to Okinawa. And the American girls, or American-looking girls, were a hot item over there. And at any rate, this girl took months to identify her. She wasn't disfigured or anything, but she didn't have a mark on her. Sometimes the coroner can tell us from surgical scars that are, I guess, in other countries are maybe crude looking or heel crude looking or whatever, and they could tell that, you know, this person isn't from around here. Anyway, so those are
Just to piggyback to what the good detective said, I don't know whether you were talking about the same case, this dismembered gentleman, I think if I remember right, he was identified by visual means. We don't usually like visual,
Yeah.
but in this case, he had a mole and he acted in a movie. I don't want to say what type of movie, but and that's how we identified him. And the other thing is, when you have a dismembered remains, it's very important that you look at the margin of resection, because sometimes it gives you telltale evidence of the tool used in the dismemberment. And we have a tool mark expert in our office. So if you do find the other part, in his case, we didn't find, you may be able to match it like a jigsaw puzzle sometimes in addition to DNA. And we have had that happen too. And the other interesting case where we have worked together, I think, not with LAPD, I think that was a sheriff case. We had a grave robber who dug up a grave and then took the skull and then threw it in the freeway, and then it came in as a case to us. But then we figured it out that it was belonged to a gravesite. But the problem is, in those cases, because the body was buried many years ago, we didn't have any dental or ID, anything left on the person. So actually, in that case, it was just a physical match going back to the gravesite.
I'm sure as artificial organs evolve, especially those that require power sources and programmers. I mean, I'm talking, you know, the artificial hearts, but even in the, you know, you mentioned pacemakers. There's always been, and it's interesting, there's a paranoia among the recipients of these that somebody could change the programming or alter how they function electronically, and then it would be very difficult to figure out what happened to that person, other than it was a natural event. But some of the, you know, defibrillators and things actually do record, so you can go in and record the events that took place. But it does open the door to, you know, what some people say, well, what, you know, it's really interesting. Well, I fight with my wife. Can she unplug this artificial heart in the middle of the night for me?
Oh, no.
You know, it's amazing that the fear that comes across with technology.
Yeah. We do have a cardiologist who comes to our office, by the way, and evaluates cases with pacemakers, because
wow.
sometimes the families want to know whether the pacemaker functioned properly or not.
Yeah.
And actually, we had a gentleman who had a pacemaker with an automatic defibrillator, and he collapsed during a basketball game. And the family felt that the defibrillator didn't do its job. So luckily, the cardiologist brought the proper programmer, and by telemetry, we were able to download the data.
Yeah.
And we found it did function properly.
Oh,
so
wow.
there are a lot of interesting aspects to when you
Definitely.
have
All kinds of medical
Devices, you mean.
anomalies. If someone was a victim of a crime and as a result of that needed an organ, how could our characters explain to them? Like, would a doctor explain how does the list work and stuff if we wanted to do an episode about that?
Well, I mean, we got into a lot of trouble in Nebraska a while ago. Not in trouble, but we evaluated a woman who was in jail for murder, prostitution, things like that. She'd been in jail for 20 years, and she came up as a potential candidate for a liver transplant. And so obviously there's a lot of hand-wringing and things of that nature amongst a lot of the lay community about the propriety of offering somebody like that an opportunity with life-saving organs. So just for the record, legally you have to offer that to that person. That's standard of care. That is cruel and unusual punishment by not offering them. I forgot which bill, which thing that is, but that is the law. And then, because I know that my name was in a variety of newspapers around the country, sort of saying this is what we have to do. This is not, our job is simply to provide medical support for various people. It's up to the society to make decisions about whether or not we should or should not be doing it. As long as the laws say we do it, then we do it. If the country wants to change the laws and say we don't do it, then that's another issue altogether. But that's pretty. That is what there isn't a lot of. It's very emotional decision, particularly if it's a real ne'er-do-well who's being considered for this transplant. Some person with this. And I'm sure on TV you can go from, whatever, this woman who killed somebody and was a prostitute, 20 years ago. Now she was just like a little old grandma in the hospital, in the jail. But if you found some other with a more heinous history, you could create invoke a lot more emotion in people along the way.
The other problem, to piggyback to what the good doctor said, is that they're the ward of the state and the taxpayer pays for the transplant. So that's another issue which comes up. But as he said, I think we should not look at those aspects. If a person needs it and they are the first one in line, they should get it.
Right. It's just
They're a human being.
right. That's right. It's a civilized society, and I think that's what people are supposed to do. So.
That makes sense. What if, how would you explain to someone who just got on the list how it works, like in general, just the basics?
It depends on the list, but basically, it's the sickest patients first. It is very transparent. I think people who are in the business recognize it. I mean, despite there's years ago, I think many people remember what happened with Mickey Mantle, and the Mick got his transplant in about I don't know, in a week or something like that. At the end of the day, and he died some months later from complications of his cancer. But the truth is, if he really wanted to do the best possible thing, is that if he didn't get transplanted, that would have been the most powerful message that could have come across. Is that even if the Mick couldn't get a liver transplant, then obviously the system could not be gamed. And despite everybody's protestations, nobody would really ever believe the fact that he didn't get some preferential treatment, even though he didn't.
Right.
So basically, it's just you take whoever is there, and we match patients by blood group and size and a variety of sort of technical issues. But basically, it's the sickest patients first. And there's a variety of nuances to that, but that's the underlying premise or the theory behind it all. And whether it's heart transplants or lung transplants or liver transplants, but that's how it goes, and it's transparent. It's a public.
Makes sense.
It's a, anybody who think I guess there's always some way to game some system, but I'm telling you, it's a.
Seems impenetrable.
Well,
That's
as much
good.
as anything can be.
Yeah.
Right.
What about, like, you read about cases where people, like, are looking for live donors more and, like, have a billboard, and do those typically work?
That's a much more interesting topic. I think that's, yeah. So there's a whole issue of, paying for organs, which I think is a really great discussion.
Although we hear Donate Life, what do you think? We hear that doesn't happen in the U.S., or?
There hasn't been a full case of it happening, so that's our evidence that it's not. It's usually the system itself is not going against it, but you might find specific people trying to go against it and get caught.
Like individuals. I
Right,
see.
there are people who, there is something called directed donation, and that happens not often, but over the years, Bob and I have seen this where particularly somebody, they're in a church and they need a kidney transplant and everybody knows about it, and so somebody in their community or in their parish or something dies, and they say, well, I want my kidney to go to Mrs. Jones, and that's perfectly legitimate, and that's something that happens, and it's then people just get a little more uncomfortable with that as it progresses, and it gets a little broader in terms of people putting up billboards and or people going. Years ago there was a famous case where dad got on TV with his little daughter who was a baby who needed a liver transplant, just begging for somebody to donate some organs to save his little girl's life. And so those things are complicated, but directed donation is out there. It's legal. It's an accepted way of doing things.
recently, Natalie Cole, I think in our area, had received a directed donation, and a popular belief is that movie stars get, first rite of passage on transplants. But in her case, it's about star power, and people know. And in a particular family, they wanted to direct the kidney donation to Natalie Cole. In that case, it's not the sickest patient. Here, it's a directed donation where someone knows someone and has given an advance directive to give that kidney to that person.
Now, last year we saw a movie about a live donation where the guy gave his friend a kidney. Does it ever happen where someone's alive and they just want to give it, or is that not advised?
Yeah,
That's an
Absolutely.
altruistic donor. And
living donor. Philip Palmer's Channel 7 ABC was a altruistic living kidney donor. Gave it to his best friend.
we do that quite often. For kidneys in particular, there's a family in Nebraska that I think all the family members, not all, but many of the family members have all donated kidneys over the years to anonymous recipients. It's just sort of something of their way of giving back. And
I
think
imagine
it's
some
mostly
people have
just-
the fear that somehow they're going to be less without one, but is that, if you have two, one is enough?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Arthur's here. He could comment on that. But the data on giving a living kidney donation is those people, if they don't have some sort of underlying medical problem, do the same if it's people with two kidneys. So it's a pretty safe thing. It's obviously a big operation and all that kind of stuff. There's risks to that, but otherwise it's okay.
We've got 3 people in our office that have given kidneys to, one gal gave it to her husband, another guy gave it to his sister, and I forget what the third one was, but I would be curious if, granted that it's transparent, all of this stuff, but so if I have a case and I've got some celebrity's kid has been murdered and I've got a witness that is the only witness and the witness is very, very sick or this or that, and I would think that an interesting twist to a program would be that the efforts to try to bump this witness into a position to keep that witness alive so that we can solve the case, find the kid, whatever.
Or if a
And,
cop felt so strongly he became or she became a living donor to keep this
Yeah.
witness alive to, tell her
but,
story.
I was at
You'll see
Cedar
that, season
Sinai
9.
Hospital. I was at Cedar Sinai
idea.
Hospital the night that Lucille Ball passed away, and I was there on another case up in the ICU of somebody clinging to life, and the ICU nurses, whether this is true or not, I have no idea, but the ICU nurses were just furious that there was a 16-year-old kid that had been bumped and that they were going to try an organ transplant with her to keep her, and I don't know whether it ever happened or went through, but that's probably 20 years ago now. But that was, so I don't know. It's
20 years ago is a
big
lifetime.
difference,
It's
yeah.
a lifetime in transplantation. That would have been 1990, and things were. I think I was pretty active in transplantation then. I was a young guy, and things were pretty transparent then. But it was a smaller group. Wasn't as much going on. But I can tell you today there is such enormous regulatory and governmental oversight, and so many people looking at your business, and it's all on a public website. Everything is, it's good, and I think and it's healthy, and I think it's important.
I mean, I think you're right. I think everybody has to realize that in the last 20 years, things have gone so far, and the regulations have changed so much that the stories, if they evolve, come from the 80s when things weren't regulated. I mean, we were flying everywhere in the early 80s for organs, and because we were one of the bigger transplant centers at the time. And I mean, we walked away from some donors because we didn't feel there was enough declaration of brain death, because in some states, in the South, all you really had to have was 2 doctors that said, yeah, he's brain dead. There was no, EEGs, there were no apnea tests. I mean, they just basically had to say, yeah, he's fine. And the decision was made easier because, when you cut skin and the patient moves, it's a little unnerving. But that doesn't, those kinds of things are that's gone. I mean, there's none of, yet there is still the lingering fear from people. It's interesting that might happen. It just can't anymore. But we also had, talking of directed donation, we had, I remember a case of directed donation that was very suspicious in terms of the person saying, I want to donate this person's organs to that person, and the whole scenario was very clouded, and so we walked away from it because it wasn't clear to us that this was a straight-up directed donation, that there was something that went on that promoted that patient's death. So, I mean, I think,
But I'll tell you, Bob, the truth is, in the transplant business, we do a lot of living donation, and we don't ask a lot of questions. I mean, people do not do financial searches. So when somebody says somebody from their church is giving somebody a kidney, nobody says, okay, and everybody assumes that it's all altruistic and everything's on
you
the up
don't
and up. I mean, when we talk about paying for it, nobody really knows. And actually, probably the people don't want to know. There's no method or way to look into it and say, was there some sort of transfer of $10,000 somewhere along the way? Did somebody get a card? Did somebody
Sounds like the
get,
detective's business.
Right. Those are the kind of things that may or may not take place. And as a transplant community, we just simply make sure people pass the sniff test in terms of we don't think that's happening, but in fact we don't know that.
All right, well, I think
Can I-
we're just about out of time. So thank you to everyone, all doctors, detectives. I never got to question and answer. I forgot about that part. People can come up to them.
Well, all set?
Okay. Hey, Tony, can you give me a mic? Next in this theater, we have Detour, a rock and roll film about life, death, and bodily functions. And we have another panel going on called Doctors Delve Deep, which is in the Scheinberg family screening room, which if you go down the stairs, sort of bear right into a little hallway, it'll take you into the Scheinberg, and that is where we're going to the backstory into doctors' lives. When I used to go pitch at Spelling, my agent would always say to me, love triangles and secrets. Love triangles and secrets. That's what Spelling wants. So we're trying to get into love triangles and secrets in doctors' lives and the sort of juicy backstories, and that's in the Scheinberg family screening room. Hey. Lights back up, please. Thanks. That was just a preview. It's Detour. Yeah, wonderful film on organ donation. Okay, can we have the filmmaker? Can Jim come on down? He's going to do a little brief introduction and tell you how brilliant this film is, which I agree with. There he is. All right, let's give it like 5 just to make sure we get everybody in here that wants to see it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Does that mean I have to talk for 5 minutes?
You can talk for 5 minutes if you want. I'm just saying you could start
I
at
was literally
5
going to
minutes.
just come up and say, hi, I'm Jim Granato, and I'm the director and producer of Detour. Thanks so much for coming out today. And thanks to Chris and Tanai and everybody at Donate Life, and all the lovely staff for having us. It's really, really a treat, an honor to be here today. So you kind of caught the a little quick moment there in the beginning of the film. So hopefully for those of you who wasn't so sure if you're going to stick around and you saw them like, oh man, that looks great. Thanks for sticking around. But just a brief introduction. You know, I worked on this film for about 3 years. The way I got into it was because the subject, Pat Spurgeon, who you're going to get to know, I think quite well over the next 90 or so minutes. He's a good friend of mine, and he really just called me up one day and say, hey man, my kidney is starting to need some special attention again, and I really wanted to document something. And neither one of us had any idea, and I'm sure there's a lot of filmmakers in the audience, when they start a project, have no idea where that could go. And it really was initially going to be like the small video piece. And I could explain more about that a little later. In fact, Pat is here today, and he and I are going to be here after the screening, doing a little talk back with you guys, taking some questions. With Lois Vosen from Independent Lens. She's a series producer. So the movie was on Independent Lens, which we were still very excited about. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how that got included in the season as well. So thanks so much for coming. We'll see you soon.